Hey folks, this is just a quick word at the beginning of the episode from Jake. So Carrie and I were asked to be guests on the podcast Death Prattle, where we were asked to talk about a young adult book named The Boy in the Black Suit by Jason Reynolds. So we did that, and the host of Death Prattle said that it would be okay if we put this episode out on our own feed as well, so that's what this is. Everything else is pretty much explained in the episode proper. So here it is, and I'll be back at the very end to say another thing or two. Enjoy!
Welcome all. We're gathered here today
to talk about death and mourning, because this stuff is really weird and nobody seems to talk about it. Welcome to Death Prattle, a not-so-serious talk about a very serious topic. I'm Tara Dunderdale, and I'm here with my co-host, Talcott Starr.
This week, we're joined by special guests Carrie and Jake from the Love You Like Crazy podcast to discuss the novel The Boy in the Black Suit by Jason Reynolds.
Hi, Jake and Carrie. Thanks for joining us.
Hi. Hello. We're so very happy to be here.
It's true, we are. Thanks for inviting us.
I just put a toddler to bed, so I'm probably more excited about a little alone time than other people are.
That's fair. How's everybody doing? Is it 1,000 degrees where everyone lives? It's 1,000
I'm in North
degrees
Carolina.
Here. Oh.
So, yeah.
So, yes.
It's surprisingly not terrible here. It's like in the low 70s, and I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop because it has been murderously hot recently, but this is nice. Maybe it means summer is over and we're already moving into fall, and I will convince myself of this.
Summer will never be over.
It's my fear.
Yeah, it's about the same. I'm in Rhode Island, and it's been hot, but today it's actually, kind of high 70s, low 70s. It's been pretty nice.
Yeah, screw you.
Fair enough.
I like our broad representation of the eastern half of the United States here. I'm in Maryland, and Talcott's in Ohio, so I love living in the future. I love that. I'm like, hey, people in 3 other states, let's have a conversation.
Let's talk about a book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're talking about The Boy in the Black Suit this week, and Carrie and Jake have a podcast called Love You Like Crazy, which is a YA podcast, which is great, and I love.
Thank you.
There's a lot of swearing in it.
True.
Yeah, how do y'all feel about swearing? Because it's going to happen.
We're pro
we're
swearing.
fine with it.
Yeah, we're pro swearing. Normally,
Okay,
this is like one of our lighter episodes, but normally, like when we have guests on, we're like, hey, you want to talk about like one of the most intense sads of your life, but you can't say fuck. Like, we like to leave that door open if somebody feels the need.
That would be like an impossible challenge.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I don't know how many synonyms I would be able to come up with for fuck.
Well, we're pro swearing here at Death Prattle. But I started, like, the way that this whole thing came up was I was sort of like binging through your back catalog, and any like pop culture podcasts that I listen to, I very rarely like consume the culture, because I'm just like, I listen to the show and then I don't have to read the book because I know everything that happened in it. But I was like, I was listening to your show and I was like, I really want to read some YA, if not something that they're reading on the show. So I got a whole bunch of books from my library, like on an audiobook, and I got this one that I got just because it started with a B, and so it was one of the first ones that came up.
So this whole thing came about by happenstance.
Yeah, it was like available now, YA, available on audiobook. This one, click. And it like has won awards and stuff like that. And so, and And then I was reading it and I was like, holy shit, Talcott, you have to read this book and we have to talk about it on the show. And I was like, I should talk to Jake. Maybe he'll want to come on. And then we're like, let's do a crossover episode. And then now I've forced 3 other people to read this book. Forced is the wrong word. I liked it. Spoiler.
Convinced.
Yeah.
Invited.
So, what were you about to say?
Oh, I was going to say it was a great book, but it was a really rough read at the same time. Like, so this whole thing started a few months ago, I think. Tara, when you found the book, and I went to the library, picked it up, started reading, and it was such a good depiction of like that kind of grief and mourning period that I had a really hard time actually reading through it because I just kept getting kind of flashback sidetracked on it. So I kind of put it down for a couple of months until you message, hey, by the way, we're having Jake and Carrie on next week. At which point I ran out and grabbed the audiobook, and it was much easier for me to listen through on the audiobook because it was going to kind of keep moving. So every time I got lost in thought, the book just kind of kept moving with me. And I keep feeling like that's sounding like disparaging the book, but it was just so well written that it kept invoking my own memories kind of when I didn't need it to.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as someone who is not as steeped in grief, I found there to be problems with the book where I was like, oh, this doesn't feel realistic to me. But I guess I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, everybody's is different too. Like the way that everybody experiences grief is different. But I found it so okay, so let me back up. So this book is about like broad brush. It's a 16, 17-year-old boy whose mom dies early in the book after a somewhat long battle with cancer, or I guess somewhat quick. I forget. It's been a while.
Yeah, I think it was fairly quick.
Fairly fast. Yeah. But like a pretty aggressive, quick cancer. And his dad is sort of like dealing with that through a lot of alcohol use and ends up in an accident. And so this kid kind of ends up a little bit kind of on his own and is sort of navigating all of this a little bit without Carrie, it made me think of like something that you bring up on your show all the time about like YA books of like, where are the parents? Like, why are there no parents around? But this was like very clear why there were no parents around. It was like, okay, this is just going to be a teen on his own for 300 pages, but we're going to establish early on why.
Which is at least an acceptable use of the parental loss, like, trope that seems to happen in YA books. At least they're dead.
Well, the dad was still alive. He was just like in the hospital.
It's not dead, but I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting. Like when you guys got in touch about this, the books that Carrie and I have been reading recently, of course, now I'm not going to remember what any of them are, and we'll have to look them up. Let's see. That thing we call Heart by Sheba Karim has this whole genocide subplot. Anna Dressed in Blood, obviously is a ghost story. The Amber Spyglass, his Dark Materials series by Philip Pullman, like the
Grasshopper Jungle.
Yeah, but like the desire to
oh gosh,
like a plot, one of the subplots of the Amber Spyglass is two of the characters decide that they are going to go to the land of the dead to meet their deceased loved ones and then let them all out into the world. Like that's a major plot of that book. and and so I was like, are all YA books like this? Have I just not noticed as much? I guess they aren't all. We just have been hitting a string of them, but this one, I think it's true that there's an extent to which in some YA books, particularly ones that maybe aren't as good, where death is just like kind of a handy way to get the parents out of the way. But obviously in this one, like it's kind of the whole point that it's about that experience of losing a parent and then kind of finding your way through that. And so that, I don't know, that was interesting. Maybe
there were a couple of other books that I started around the same time that I read this, and I now cannot for the life of me remember what any of them are because I didn't finish them, but they were all they were all sort of like in like post-apocalyptic a little bit, or not even post-apocalyptic, but like fantasy world that's like where the civilization is like not
well, that's 3/4 of YA right
yeah.
there.
So, yeah. But they were at least one of them that I was reading was like, it was so unrelentingly sad. It was like that thing like in a lot of prestige television of like, this is dark, so it's serious and it's important because it's so dark and intense. And it was like, this is not fun. This is just like, I just feel like stressed out and panicked all the time reading this. And I'm 34. Like, I can't imagine being 16 and reading it. And one of the things that I really liked about this was like, it was, and this is maybe partially because I do this show, but it was, they're dealing with a really intense thing. And he's, you know, and he's the main character is like pretty intense, like thoughtful kid. He's working in a funeral home and he's like watching these funerals and everything. But there are moments in it, like it has moments of like normality and lightness and stuff that felt more, I don't know, it was just like there was relief in it in a way that I find so many YA books are just like, life is hard and it's like so sad all the time and then everything's terrible. It's like, and then there's a revolution or something. Like it's
Yeah, I think that normality is one of the things that really stuck out to me. With it did a really good job of balancing that life is normal. Oh crap, now I'm remembering I'm sad. Life is normal, hit with another flashback kind of thing. Like it handled that really well, to just that kind of unreal, you know, time after a loss where you're almost second guessing when things are normal, but you're craving that more normalcy. And, you know, especially the first part of it kind of did a lot of, I don't know whether to say they were flashbacks or exposition, but they were kind of both at the same time, you know, because you were getting it all from the present and then you'd get a memory of his mom walking down to the ambulance for her last trip to the hospital, and kind of the way those were interwoven with, you know, kind of everyday moments in there really struck me.
I definitely sold this book to Talcott as like, there's not really very much talk about like her actually dying. It's really about the after. And he was like, there's so much of her dying. It's like a third of the book is her dying. It's just not all in a row.
Yeah.
So Carrie, you said that there was stuff that like you felt like wasn't realistic. What was the?
Well, I think there was just so many like coincidences in the book that, you know, really bothered me. You know, from Lovey, you know, being the girl whose mom was killed when Matt was a kid, to the Candy Man being the guy who injured Mr. Ray. And it just so happened that they all sort of found each other through Matt. It's like, this doesn't seem realistic to me, but it's a good story.
Yeah, the coincidences are all very convenient.
Yeah.
But also, like, you know, if you're all sort of in the same community, it's not totally, you know, like I don't know. I like, I could see it happening, maybe not, like I could see all of those lives crossing and recrossing if they're all living in the same community over like multiple generations, but maybe not all in the actually in like just this 4-month span that this book takes place during.
Yeah, I mean, it makes for a good story, but how believable is it? And the same thing was, the kid who was hitting on Lovey at the beginning of the book just so happened to be, the gang member who gets shot later. Is that coincidence or, maybe inevitable? I don't know, but it's just like, man, everybody knows Matt. Is what it comes down to. Everybody knows Matt.
I mean, he wears a suit every day. He's a teenager.
Yeah. I want to talk about that suit, but actually I wanted to talk about another thing that I just wanted to criticize a little bit about the book, which is, and I kind of wonder if, well, Talcott, you're a poet, right? So I don't know if you haven't, I kind of wondered if it was related to the author also being a poet, but just some of the naming stuff seemed a little bit on the nose. Like, I mean, like the girlfriend's name being Love is a strong example, but also there's a whole subplot where Matt, or not a subplot exactly, but there's a whole thing about how Matt doesn't like flowers because, they're beautiful, but they die and then they're gone, and and it just seems like a big waste, which is a huge, I mean, I think that's a reasonable character trait, and particularly in this situation, it obviously has overtones. But then I'm not sure if it was necessary to name his mother Daisy.
I can't even catch that.
I didn't either.
So I think with the coincidences and with the naming, although I'm kind of rolling my eyes at the Daisy thing now that you pointed it out, I missed that.
Sorry.
It's okay. I kind of read this almost as magical realism-y. Like, not obviously nobody sprouted wings in the middle of town or anything like that, but there was somewhat a heightened reality to everything that, of course there are coincidences, and, you get, unrealistic coincidences all the time, and they just usually don't stack on top of each other the way they do here. But I don't know, those didn't bother me, I think, because it felt like kind of that reinforcing of, all of this is connected in, and what's the most traumatic day ever for one person is a weird sleepover with a friend for another person. And I liked the shifting perspectives on those events, and I think the alternative would have been to add in 20 more characters and make this a War and Peace length novel. So I think condensing that down to, a handful of characters works to me.
Like on the nose stuff, I mean, the naming is a little bit on the nose, and it really 100% just blew right past me, which maybe just not that deep. But it when it's for teenagers, I've worked with, so I actually used to work not in this neighborhood where this takes place, but in the adjacent neighborhood. So there's a lot of real places in this book that's another thing that I really liked. But I've also worked with this age group, and on the nose, they need it to be on the nose.
Yeah. And I mean, if other people didn't notice it, then that could just be me being overly picky as well. I don't mind that being the case.
Pretty cringeworthy now that you've pointed it out. But
I mean, for a 17-year-old kid reading this, it's fine. For me, maybe not so much. Talcott
was having trauma flashbacks, and meanwhile I was I know right where that cab is dropping him off near the Botanic Gardens. And, I used to live right up the street from there, and I was having all these weird nostalgia experiences. But then also, I mean, I really related to Matt as being a teen. I was younger than the character was when my dad died, but being a teen who loses a parent, and then sort of just this feeling of nobody really understands what I'm going through. And actually then also much like his relationship with Lovey, developed relationships and friendships with people that were largely based on the fact that we'd both lost a parent at a young age. Because it's just okay, you understand my weird sadness.
Yeah, I think, at the beginning of the book, the very first chapter, he's talking about walking through the halls at school, and no one sort of gets him anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that part was the most realistic to me, where, you're oh, I've opened this door and I can never go back and I'm a different person now. And the people who I used to hang out with, I can't talk to them or they don't feel comfortable talking to me. And it's so you create new relationships because old relationships just don't work the same way anymore. So that was, I think, the most realistic chapter in the book was just the opening chapter. And I remember texting Jake and going, oh man, this book's going to kick my ass, isn't it?
So I know I know the answer a little bit with Talcott, but I mean, he can also answer. But what did everybody think of the way? So he gets this. So his mom dies and his dad's in the hospital. And he kind of like needs to make ends meet, and his internship fell through because of timing of everything going on in his life, and so he ends up getting a job after school at the funeral home, the local funeral home, and starts attending the funerals. And he's attending the funerals because he just really he gets this sort of like weird satisfaction out of seeing other people at that saddest moment, like the person who's closest to the deceased, the moment that that it all sort of like hits them, he feels like it's like a kinship satisfaction of like, okay, somebody else is feeling this. What were your sort of reactions to that?
Well, I mean, I saw it as grief porn. I don't know how else to describe it. But like, I mean, maybe it was, sort of a, because he said like, he would look for the person who was the saddest and like wait till they sort of got to that point. He'd be like, okay, now I can go. It's like, oh, that's grief porn. But that's how I saw it. Jake, what do you think?
I mean, I think that there's that there's a lot of that there, but I also feel like one of the things that maybe he didn't realize that he was looking for until he saw it with Lovey was he wanted to see like how are people dealing with it and what are they doing, and when he sees that she seems to be like holding it together, how is she doing that? And so part of it is just like feeling this kinship with strangers. And there's at one point I think where he's at a funeral and the preacher says something like, nobody can know what you're going through right now, and he thinks like that's what they said at my mother's funeral, but I know that person does know what I was going through, and there's something, and so there's just something there for him.
Yeah.
One of the things, I mean, not to change the subject too much, but one of the things that you mentioned is like him losing his internship because he couldn't start the job on time. And I feel like that's something that you've talked about on this podcast from time to time, is just like there's this traumatic event and then there are these weirdly mundane after effects that you then just have to deal with in the midst of it all. Like, figuring out what your tax status is now and, or, figuring out what to do now that your internship is no longer available and stuff like that. And I thought that was an interesting thing.
Yeah.
That was like a thing that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in a YA book, I feel like. So it was nice to see it in there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that struck me too. It's just that the world is still moving even while your world has stopped, kind of feeling. And then kind of going back to the, funeral home. And I think, Jake, I kind of got a similar reading to what you did of the kind of looking for companionship and how to deal with it, because I realized, like, as I was, he was first going to the funerals and he was kind of describing it. It's always the same. The person closest always breaks down. Then when that started to change a little bit and he started to see different reactions and still looking for that kinship, and I kind of realized that's what this entire show is. Because there was so much of me at the beginning, like, wow, I can't think of anything I want to do less than watch a bunch of funerals. Like, Val didn't have a funeral, and I'm still, glad that she didn't. Like, I think that would have helped my own grieving process. And I don't think watching more funerals would have either. But I think that idea of nobody understands, none of my friends have gone through this. Everyone who's close enough to have gone through this is currently mourning. Like, he can't really go to his dad on this because his dad's dealing with his own side of everything. But if he's there at a funeral and he's seeing someone else mourning someone else, there's still this sense of, okay, it's okay that I'm mourning. It's okay that I'm still processing this because other people are still processing this. And it didn't strike me as exploitive so much as, I guess, I'm trying to think of a nice friendly word for eavesdroppy.
Well, so I think that none of these descriptions are in conflict with one another, right? Like, they're all kind of true at the same time. And
yeah,
the grief porn description is kind of perfect because I was thinking about, because I didn't go to funerals, but like, I definitely did this to myself as a teenager, where like my dad had gastrointestinal cancer and had his stomach removed about 4 months before he died. And so he lost a ton of weight. And so he was very, very thin at the end of his life, like 90 pounds thin. And shortly after my dad died is when Philadelphia, or like around the time that my dad died is when Philadelphia came out, or like was available on, like HBO or something. And I have very vivid memories. Like, I have more vivid memories of doing this than even of like seeing my dad at the end of his life, of watching that scene in Philadelphia, like towards the end, where Tom Hanks is like dancing to opera with his IV and like talking about the beauty and the music, and just rewinding and like watching that part, like renting that movie when I was like 13, just watching that like 5-minute scene.
That
just
is a gut punch.
Yeah, just like like really like ugly cry, like hunched over crying, like, and I would do it on purpose. I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna watch Philadelphia because it's gonna make me so sad about my dad." And it's like such a weird, like totally fucked up choice, but probably helped me like channel some of whatever feelings I was feeling into, like, I'm crying about this movie, not about like whatever else is going on.
Wow.
I mean, plus that's a very 13-year-old way of dealing with things. I mean, you don't really have the maturity to, like, I'm gonna go talk to a therapist today. You're just like, fuck, I gotta watch Philadelphia.
Yeah, and it's just like, I'm just gonna watch. And that was sort of what I like really identified with him in that moment of like, ooh, I'm gonna watch this person be so sad. Like I was like totally, I totally got where he was, and it felt really real to me in a way that I feel like it probably wouldn't to other people. Jake, you wanted to talk about the suit.
Yeah, I want to hear about this suit, this stinky ass suit.
Well, this is like maybe a product of thinking about this book too hard, but especially in that first chapter, this kind of sense of life kind of going on as normal on the surface, but inside, like, but below the surface things are completely different. And then I felt like by wearing, and so like everyone is treating him weird, even though he's the same guy he's always been, and well, I guess not somewhat different, but they're all their same friend or whatever. But they're all acting weird around him. And so then he starts wearing this suit, and it kind of is like gives a reason, like people are reacting to the suit. And even though like he talks about how he doesn't like it that people are, he wonders if what people are saying about him and stuff. I mean, he could just bring it on a rack or something, and like he doesn't need to actually be wearing it at school all day. So I feel like it's on purpose, and it's sort of a way to make this kind of invisible difference visible. And to explain what it's about. And similarly, Lovey has the necklace with her mother's name on it. And I kind of wonder if that, and I kind of feel like that's a little bit the same thing in the context of the book. So that was my little thesis about that. I don't know what y'all think about it.
Yeah, well, there was that great line, and I wish I could remember the exact wording, but where he basically says, wearing that suit, everybody started to lump him in with the goth and emo kids when he is who they pretend to be, basically.
I really like that line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember like I was listening to it in an audiobook, like laughing. Well, it's like the Victorian mourning tradition, right? Of like you wear black for a year so that everybody knows you're sad.
He needed a hat.
Yes.
He needed a hat.
Yeah. Carrie doesn't know what that means.
I don't know what that means.
There's like a Victorian etiquette book that we talk about in our first episode before we really understood what our show was about. That is like, it has the guidelines for what you wear when you're in mourning, and there are rules about how close you are to somebody that died and how wide your hat brim is. So like the husband of a woman who dies should wear a 7-inch hat brim, and then her children or like brothers should be 5 inches, and then like well-wishers it's 3 or something like that. So it's like your hat size correlates to how sad they expect you to be.
Oh, okay.
Victorians were weird.
Yeah. Okie dokie.
I really liked the like thread through the thing of like him cooking and being like, being really into cooking, and that being something that he did with his mom, and his insistence that garlic powder was the secret to all delicious things.
I mean, he's not wrong.
No, because I'm like, that's both kind of like a very adolescent approach to cooking, but also like definitely something I 100% still do now.
I do want to make the sauce that he mentions, because they give the recipe in the book, and I want to try making that.
Where's the
They
recipe?
do.
I must have missed it. I want it.
I saw the cookie
yeah.
recipe. Oh no, you're right. He does give the recipe.
He does, yeah.
I missed it.
It's like ketchup, brown sugar, mustard, garlic powder. I can't remember.
I remember
what else
this now. I think I went like ketchup. Nope.
No.
The cookie recipe in my version is on page 169. If anybody wants to make a cookie recipe, his mom's cookies, and it says no shells in the eggs, which is real cute.
Let's see what this brings me to. Page.
But that's the cookies. I don't know if
It doesn't bring me where. It always depends on what font size I'm using in my Kindle. Dang it.
Yeah. It was like ketchup and garlic powder, and I forget what else. Definitely ketchup and garlic powder.
So, did anybody sort of assume that Mr. Ray was going to sort of take Matt a little more under his wing business-wise, and maybe suggest that he would be taking over the business when he gets older? Or is that just me sort of assuming foreshadowing?
No, I totally assume that if this were a TV series or if there are sequels, that I would not be at all surprised if he.
His brothers weren't going to do it. I mean, Court couldn't do it, and I forget what the middle brother was. But I'm like, okay, so they're not going to take over the business. Well, it sounds like Mr. Ray wants Matt to do it. When's he going to suggest he goes to school? But it didn't happen, and I was sort of disappointed. But at the same time, Matt could also go to culinary school and be like, I don't know, the funeral chef.
I got the impression that the middle brother definitely thought that that's what was going to happen, regardless of what Mr. Ray's plans were, because he kept being a little bit crappy to Matt in a way that made me think.
I kind of liked that he didn't. I thought, like that it's sort of like, I think that the fact that he didn't kind of grounded it in reality a little bit more. It's like, he's 17. I don't know if he can run a business. Like, I'm not going to make promises to him. Like, this is my livelihood.
Maybe he'll become a chef.
I did get the impression that if Matt wanted to keep doing this, like over the course of the next few years, he'd basically become a de facto apprentice. And so that route's definitely open to him. But yeah, I don't think that it was necessary to the plot to kind of play that out to the end either.
No, I don't think it was. I just sort of was expecting it. I kept like waiting for it to happen as I'm reading the book, and it didn't. I was like, oh, well, I guess that's how it goes. And it makes sense. I mean, he hasn't even graduated high school yet.
Yeah.
But the fact that I was expecting it maybe surprised me that it didn't happen.
So,
and maybe that's
Carrie
a good thing.
Carrie and Jake, you both read way more YA than I think either of us do. How, for sort of like YA tropes or standards, was the love? Like, how did you feel about the love story in this?
Oh, it was 100% YA. I mean,
yeah,
it was uncomfortable. It was so like quirky, which is a very YA romance thing. You always got to be a little quirky about it.
Which seems very real.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed about it is, I feel like often in YA books, their protagonist doesn't have a lot of dating experience really, and so it's kind of, I feel like that was also kind of tropey in this. Yeah. One thing that that kind of struck me on the reread is that this book doesn't have a lot of conflict really. Occasionally a couple of the characters will kind of have some kind of dust up, but it's almost always resolved at the beginning of the next chapter. Because
I think the whole point of the book is that all the conflict is internal.
Yeah.
I mean, if he had external conflict on top of his internal conflict and his turmoil, then it would be too heavy a book to read.
Right. Yeah. But I just always appreciate it when characters in YA books use their words.
I maybe I'm misremembering because it's been a while since I read it, but I liked that it didn't feel like at the end of the book, the implication felt sort of like he and Lovey had sort of resolved whatever barriers there were for them to try dating, like for real. And that was it. It was like, there was no implication of like, and then they got married and lived happily ever after and everything was perfect, because like, it sort of just implied that it was like, these two people have each other for the time that they need each other right now. And it didn't feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
And I think it also felt like, and if it doesn't work out, they'll both be okay.
Yeah.
Which is not always the case. When you read YA books, it's like they break up. It feels like the end of the world. But I think for both of them, they've grown together and apart in such a way that if it doesn't work out, they're still going to be okay. And the reader also feels like it's still going to be okay, which is a really refreshing sentiment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would not have liked this book as much as I did if the implication at the end was, and now they're in love and so everything is fine, which like the book is so I think like carefully crafted that isn't where it would end up, but that like I would have been really bummed if it was like, and now he's in love and everything's fine. It's like, no, now he's still sad about his mom, like,
but it is also
so is
the girl he likes.
Yeah, it's like, it's not all solved. Like there's still shit going on. It's just like a little bit easier to take when you have somebody else around. Are we missing any like big major?
So the two things I kind of wanted to touch on, because of course this is what was jumping out to me, are his dad, who doesn't really get. I found the treatment of his dad kind of odd. Like the backstory with his mom and his dad meeting were all great. The idea of losing his mom caused his dad to slide back in alcoholism felt a little tropey, but also kind of realistic tropey. And then he walked into a bus, so now we don't have to worry about him for the rest of the book.
Yeah.
Kind of. I would have liked
And
to.
he never got out of the hospital, did he?
No.
I don't think so.
Like at the end,
I mean,
of the
I'm
book,
sure he
he's
did
still-
eventually.
Well,
but-
yeah.
Well, he was like, I think he was like, I think it was the same thing. Like he was making enough progress that like we're to believe that he will eventually.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, you're thinking at some point, like maybe at the end of the book, the dad moves home, but nope, still in rehab. Okay.
Yeah. So like, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of his dad and how his dad was dealing with the loss, like beyond, suddenly taking up drinking very, very heavily. But as the kind of contrast of that, finding out that Mr. Ray was also a widower and seemed to be dealing with it in a very different, better, but also kind of odd way too.
Yeah. The whole
struck
like
me.
war versus chess, like Mr. Ray, like that whole thing. I was like, man, Mr. Ray is kind of a nihilist. Like, like it's all luck, and you just better hope that you're lucky. And
I mean, I think he has the life experience to back that up.
I know, but like he's also. It's kind of interesting that he's. But then he's also like one of the kindest, nicest characters in the book. And then also the Candyman or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
Who believes in the
Yeah.
power of chess ends up just being drug addicted, homeless wreck kind of.
Well, so I thought one of the things that was I think a thing that unfolded really nicely in this was early, he's going to the funeral and he's like, everything's the same. Everybody deals with this in the same way. I can like pick out how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and sort of perceiving that like everybody's grief process is identical. And then he's through this sort of like comes in contact with people that are dealing with it and all, and in somewhat like archetypal, his dad falls apart and then Lovey is very, very like very, very strong on the outside all the time, but then she's got a softer inside under that shell and things like that, like but she's also very frank about it, and like I liked that sort of like reveal as he's going through it of seeing all these different ways of dealing with it and sort of like pulling what's useful from those for his own process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I Lovey's grief reactions kind of felt the most like mine. And I don't know if it was just I was in my 30s when I had my big loss as opposed to 17, and she was
younger.
a kid.
She was like 9 or 10, yeah.
Right, but she lived with that for a decade or so. So
Yeah.
she has, I think, a more mature grief reaction than Matt, who's been living with it for a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
But that idea of, she's kind of stoic at her grandmother's funeral, or was it great grandmother? I wasn't.
Grandmother. Yeah.
Grandmother. Okay, it was grandmother. Stoic at her grandmother's funeral, but that one little triggering phrase when Matt mentions Valentine's Day when her mom was killed, and that whole kind of stoic, I don't even know if facade's the right word, because I don't think she's putting up a front. I think she just deals with things more stoically. But that all crumbles when just there's a specific key phrase that just, pulls her back. And I thought that was handled really well without dwelling on that aspect of it either.
And the whole like Thanksgiving thing too. My parents are living, but I remember that after they split up, my mother's probably listening to this. Hi, Mom.
My mom listens every week. So.
I remember.
I think mine sometimes does.
I remember the first Thanksgiving, which I spent with my dad, and we went to my uncle's house, or actually some friends of theirs, and I just felt so alienated and I don't know, the holidays. I think including a holiday in there, even though that experience is very different from what I just described, I think is very. I think that's a good thing to include in a book like this. And I did think that the idea of, I mean, kind of the idea there is like that doing some kind of service can help you through these things, I guess. But or just doing something, I don't know, sort of carrying on her grandmother's work and stuff. And yeah.
Yeah, and he's not sitting at home alone, which he very well could be, but instead he found a way to get out of the house, and do something rather than, just kind of sit there and go, oh, this is my mom would cook, and now I'm not eating my mom's cooking, so I'm gonna listen to Tupac and cry.
The thing that Taka that you said about like her being stoic, that was another thing that I've really liked about the way that they wrote her character of she wasn't written as somebody with like a hard shell who just needed, for somebody to like kiss her and make all her sadness go away. Like I really liked that, like we got to see her like vulnerable side and like things that she was interested, like she felt so much more like fully developed than I think often like love interests in even adult novels or movies or like things that women often are. And she was like, her like frank approach to like grief and mourning and all that like didn't go away when she started dating this guy. It was just like he just understood it better, and he understood that it was more complex than that. Instead of it he managed to chisel through her tough exterior. It's like, no, her tough exterior is still there. It's just not the only thing she is. I really like that. I thought she just had a richness to her character that you just so rarely see female characters get, and even, just in general. Any other big things that we missed that people want to add?
I think I'm good.
I think I'm pretty good. I mean, for the most part, I really liked this book. I went along for the ride, basically, which is sometimes all you can do with a YA book, because this isn't my experience. I'm not a young Black male living in New York City. I haven't lost my mother. So I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to hear what he has to say and go along the ride. And I appreciate that this book exists. I don't know if there are books that deal with this topic in this way. I think it's either just like all the sad, or no big deal. But I think this sort of, balances things well, and I liked it. I didn't love it, but I liked it.
It also lets a teenage boy experience a full range of emotions, which is also something I think that we don't always get to see. Like, he's not...
That is very important.
There's not a ton of toxic masculinity in this book, and when there is, it's played for humor. It's like, look how dumb this guy is. Like, and I value that a lot.
The fact that he says, this is where I sobbed. This is how It's like, aw, thank you. Because you did. And it's okay to say that. And it's okay to talk about this. Because so many, like the scene where the gang members are at the funeral and they're all like standing there with their arms crossed because this is, for just another funeral for them. It's like, oh, is that really how you that's not how you deal with this.
But it is how they do. Like in that that's another one of those, like, the sort of like unfold the like tableau of all the different grief reactions that he starts to get exposed to.
But I appreciate the fact that Matt was written to be a human. Yeah. And instead of just another character in a book. So yay, Matt.
Jake, Talcott, any?
Yeah. I mean, I think my intro bit was kind of my final thoughts too, of just it really is one of the best kind of depictions of mourning that I've read. Like, at least, yeah, I think total. I was going to say since I experienced it, but I don't think I really recognized depictions of mourning before before Val died and I started being really immersed in it. And there really are like a dozen times in this book where they basically lay out the whole premise of our podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just am going to say something really superficial about the book, which is that, I basically sat down, and the first time I read it, I sat down and I read it in 2 sessions. And the first session ended when Matt is in line for the food at Lovey's
The
grandmother's
Chicken
funeral.
Shack? Oh, no.
No, at Lovey's grandmother's funeral, and I was like, oh my god, this is where it's like it's all gonna go wrong, and I was just cringing that something was gonna go horrible, and so I put the book down, and then the next day I picked it up, and it was basically Mr. Ray says, oh yeah, Matt works here, and then that's it. And then I read the rest of the book, so I could have read it, I could easily have read it in one sitting. I really did, despite my reservations expressed earlier. I really could have just sat down and read it in a day, I'm sure.
Yeah. I really loved this. I found it like weirdly nostalgic for my own experience as a kid. I had all kinds of nostalgia for being a teacher of high school students in Brooklyn and like living, not that far away from where this takes place. It was, I was all in on this book pretty early on. and I told Jake this, but I wanted to look over, I did it on audiobook and I wanted to look it over again before we recorded. And so I ordered a copy, and I got, on Amazon, I got the little like recommendation, and one of the Jason Reynolds is the author. I don't think we ever said that. One of Jason Reynolds' other books is about a boy who knits. And so I ordered that, and I will report back because I know the last book that Carrie and Jake read about a boy who knits on their show had very unrealistic depictions of what is possible with knitting.
I just knit a whole dress in 2 minutes.
Yeah, with my magic special knitting technique that I invented or something.
Yeah. Well, boys are magic.
Is knitting boys a subgenre of YA I don't know about?
It is now.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's two
Does
books. 2 books make a genre?
There's a sequel to the book that Carrie and I read as well.
Oh, no, there shouldn't be.
Is there really?
Yes.
Oh, somebody published that?
Carrie has already vetoed us doing
I have, yeah. Yeah, we're not doing that. No.
Well, if this knitting book is any good, I'll let you know.
Well, I think it has to be better because Jason Reynolds is he can write, whereas who was it? T.S. Easton, who wrote Boys Don't Knit in Public, was a shitty ass writer, and yeah.
Well, and Jason Reynolds has a whole bunch of YA books that have won like all kinds of awards and stuff. So I'm gonna I have it in my pile of like good intentions books that I'm gonna read. I think before this, the last book that I read was maybe it wasn't, but I think it may have been a Star Trek novel that I then sent to Talcott.
Oh no!
So it would be in somebody else's brain.
It was that good.
I'm not going to have an opinion about Star Trek on the internet, but I'll tell you.
That's
not
like
good.
2/3 of this podcast.
Well, I know. But it's usually about how much I love it.
That's
and
true.
This is a thing that I did not like.
Just without saying anything judgment-wise, it's a Star Trek novel about Captain Kirk written by William Shatner.
Yeah.
Draw your own inferences from that.
Well,
All right.
did he just write about his pecs the whole time?
That is like a significant plot point in the book, and I'm not joking.
I love me.
It's I think every single character in the book at some point we are given privy to their internal monologue, and it's an internal monologue about how great they think Kirk is. Anyway.
Yeah, well, you know what? I don't blame them. I'd do it. If I were going to write a book about me, I would write about how awesome I am, too.
That's true. I probably would, too. Carrie and Jake, thank you so much for joining us. This was fun. I feel like it's it's a little bit surreal to like be in on the conversation, because I'm used to just listening to the conversation and, answering to myself.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I had a great time.
I did too. It was really fun to talk about something that I like to talk about. So thanks for letting me do my thing.
Yeah. And if people want to hear you talk more about books.
Oh, yeah. There's a website, loveyolikecrazy.com, love YA like crazy. And you can find us on Apple Podcasts, I guess we're supposed to call it now, and anywhere else where podcasts can be listened to.
And Jake is also on the other show that I do, Dice to Meet You. He is our bard and does real bardic songs as recaps of episodes, and it's wonderful.
Thanks.
That shoelaces one has been stuck in my head for days. I don't know if that episode will be out by the time that this is out.
No, it's out.
I've heard it.
Yeah.
Oh, I listened to that one. Is that the potato song with shoelaces?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
That's the best description of that song. No one will have any idea what that means.
You're welcome.
It's real good. And if you don't want to listen to the whole episode, which you should, but if you don't, I think they're on your Bandcamp page, right?
Yeah, jacobheller.bandcamp.com.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. This was so great, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for everyone who's rated and reviewed us on iTunes and otherwise helped spread the word. We really appreciate it. And if you'd like to share a memory with us to play on the show, you can send us a voicemail at 347-687-8223.
Thank you, Talcott. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Our music is composed and performed by Matthew Price. That's Pryce. You can check out his work at facebook.com/Matthew Price Music. Special thanks to Matt for creating that for us and letting us use it. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can visit our website at prattlepod.com. We're on Twitter at prattlepod, or you can send us an email at deathprattle@gmail.com. And you can like us on Facebook. And remember,
your feelings are valid in this garbage situation.
So this is Jake again, and I just wanted to add one or two little things. First, of course, thanks to Tara and Talcott for letting Carrie and me be a guest on Death Prattle. And if you enjoyed this episode, then I definitely recommend you check out Death Prattle's back catalog, which you can find wherever you find podcasts, or you can go to their website at prattlepod.com. And I should also say that Love You Like Crazy is a member of the Ear Trumpet Audio Network. Just really brand new members of that network. So visit eartrumpetaudio.com for all your podcast needs. And you can follow them on Twitter at Ear Trumpet Audio or on Facebook at Ear Trumpet Audio. And there are plenty of other great shows on the network. Lifemark, The Realist, Kill by Kill, Please Don't Send Me Into Outer Space, Taxes and Tater Tots, As If, Ladies Who Library, Pet Cinematary, and Songs That Saved Your Life. Those are all great. Check them out. And also, they are on Patreon, and you can pledge money there, which will help support the network as a whole, as well as our show in particular. And we've got various prizes and things, and in fact, we have an announcement about that coming up as well, so stay tuned for that. But that is at patreon.com/eartrumpet, so check that out as well. And thanks for listening, and have a great day.
Give me a call when you get back. Hey there.
Hey.
EarTrumpetAudio.com.
Ideas and entertainment.
Loud and clear.